Hi, and welcome to Recovered, a podcast from the Magdalen House, a recovery community for alcoholic women. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Dallas, Texas, and known affectionately by many as Maggies. In this series, a recovered alcoholic woman active in our community shares her experiences from her recovery journey as she works the 12 steps to achieve sobriety and sustain recovery. With your host, me, Bryn Hansen, a recovered alcoholic and the community manager here at the Magdalen House. Whether you're in recovery yourself, contemplating giving it a try, curious about sobriety, or supporting someone who is, we are so glad that you're here. Thanks for listening. Hey y'all, welcome to Recovered, Interviews with Alcoholics. My name is Bryn Hansen and I'm your host. I'm also a grateful recovered alcoholic. My sobriety date is July 3rd, 2014. Today, we are interviewing a really cool special guest. He, yes, I said he, has now been a part of Maggie's for about, 6 months?
A little less than that.
Well, yeah.
This summer.
Okay, and if you don't know, some of you know, some of you might not know, Maggie's is expanding. After 36 years of serving women, we are now serving men, and Austin is heading up that project, and we are so excited.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, so excited. It's moving and grooving. And so today we're going to just hear from him, hear about his story, his experience, strength, and hope, and a little bit about what we can expect for the men's program. So Austin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, give us a little bit about what it was like before sobriety.
Okay, yeah. My name is Austin Shook, and I'm very grateful to be a recovered alcoholic and to be part of the Magdalen House and, helping get the men's program started. So my sobriety date is May 11th, 2017. A little bit about what it was like before that day. Mm-hmm. What can I say? I was a hard partier.
Yep.
My goal in life was to see the sun come up.
Yep.
As many days out of the year as possible. And I want to think, for many years there, I got to probably like around 300 days a year, I saw the sun come up. If that tells you a little bit about what it was like before I got sober.
Yeah, sleep all day, party all night.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And really, I was stuck. Right, I was stuck in this cycle that I got into because I would drink and party all night, and then I would work all day so that I had enough money to drink and party all night. Mm-hmm. But then I would need to drink and party all day while I was working so that I could keep working to make enough money to party at night, and it was just this never-ending cycle of doom, you could say, finally getting the answer of why I was doing that. I thought it was just because I was like, person with low moral standards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I finally got some key pieces of information that explained what was going on, and so. Before my sobriety date of May 11th, 2017, I was just lost in a cycle, you know? I mean, there were a lot of really good times, but the bad times, I never was able to remember how bad it got. Whenever I jumped back into the cycle again, right? Things would get bad, I would move to different parts of the country, right? Trying the geographical cure.
Just got to get out of this environment.
Right. I would change jobs. I would change parts of Dallas. I would change to living in Arizona. Mm-hmm. That was kind of where I always went when things hit the fan, and my dad was living out there. My dad got sober again when I was about 13 in Arizona. And so that's where I always got sent all the way through my teens and 20s. I, would go out there when things fell apart in Texas. I was still drinking out there, trying, the funny thing is I was actually going to AA meetings with my dad when I was a teenager and in my 20s.
No way.
I was that kid that was out in the car or in the corner of the meeting while the meeting was happening, with my headphones in, like with the punk rock, just attitude.
Yeah.
At AA meetings.
Did you ever hear anything at those meetings?
All I saw was the AA that my dad was involved in was very middle of the road. Knowing now, it was very middle of the road, and there wasn't a lot of attraction. I never heard anything. I just knew that I was never going to be like that. And then, lo and behold, I became exactly like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that probably didn't help that prejudice that I think a lot of us have in our heads of a quote-unquote alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
Just holding on to the coffee cup, white-knuckling it, don't drink today. At least that's what I thought. And it's nothing like that.
Yeah, it's funny because when I got sober, I went, through a really rigorous kind of big book program, right? I remember going to my dad after I got sober and being like, Dad, I'm having this spiritual experience. I'm having this spiritual awakening. Is the same thing happening for you? And I found out very quickly that my dad was not working a program. My dad was sober for 16 years. When he passed in 2019, which is great, right? That he passed sober, and that, he didn't die of alcoholism. But the truth is, he explained to me in 2017 when I got sober that he didn't trust anybody with his stuff, right? He didn't trust anyone in the small town he was living in enough to actually write stuff down on a fourth step and actually admit things to another person in a fifth step. And he never made amends, never cleaned up his side of the street, and never had a spiritual awakening. He was
feel heavy.
Stuck. He was stuck. And so, I'm convinced to this day that everyone in AA teaches me something. Some people teach me what to do, and some people teach me what not to do. And unfortunately, my dad was an example of what not to do. I look back with so much gratitude.
Yeah.
Of getting sober and working the steps and making amends with my dad after he had been diagnosed with cancer. My sponsor told me, don't force it if the moment arises. So my brothers and I went out to Arizona, and we were with my dad early in the morning. He's actually setting up for an AA meeting. And both of my brothers said, hey, we're going to run to the store. And all of a sudden, it was just me and my dad there. I'll never forget the way the sunlight was shining through the window with a little bit of dust in the air. You know what I mean? You could see,
yeah.
And me making amends to my dad. The amends that I made to him was the $400 he lent me under false pretenses, and how I was, my electricity hadn't been turned off. I needed money to party more, and he was bailing me out. And so when I asked that question that a lot of us are taught to ask in amends, which was, did I leave anything out? He was able to tell me how my alcoholism affected him. Because my dad was great. I mean, he drove out to Texas from Arizona several times a year. He told me in this amends I was making to him, when I asked him if I left anything out, he told me that he would drive from Arizona to Dallas, expecting to pick me up in the morning, with a time and appointment set. It was either 9:30 a.m. or whatever it was. And that he would get here all the way from Arizona, a 16-hour drive, and he would get to my apartment, and no one would answer the door. My cell phone was going straight to voicemail, and that for a bulk of that day, he was wondering whether I was alive or not. And I mean, that hit me like a ton of bricks, what I had done. You know what I mean? The way it had affected him. And the thing is, I was completely unaware.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see myself.
Yeah.
Delulu land is where I like to live sometimes.
Totally delusional. I thought, okay, I have this amends. I owe him $400.
Right.
But I mean, wondering whether your son is alive or not. That's a pretty big deal. And so, for him to have already seen me pick up a year sober.
Yeah.
Right? For him to already be aware that I was carrying the message of recovery, that I was sponsoring other men, that I was participating in my home group, and all these things that he saw me doing, he told me that was just more than enough to make it right, you know. And I did, of course, give him $40. I said, I'm going to do this 10 times until you're paid off. That was in like October, November of 2018. His cancer that he had been diagnosed with spread really quickly, and then he passed in March, 6 months later.
Wow.
I got to tell you, you know, I got to give huge props to my brother Matt. I mean, my brother Matt and my brother Colin, they were able to, after I had spent about a week in the hospital with my dad and I had to go back to work, my brother Matt and my brother Colin went out to Arizona and actually drove my dad back to Texas, where he's originally from, where his granddaughters are. And then he was able to come back and spend his last week or two at my brother's house, surrounded by family, instead of alone in Arizona. I was able to be there with my dad and both my brothers, holding my dad's hand as he took his last breath. And I mean, it's impossible for me to tell my story without talking about this.
Yeah.
You know, I had an amazing boss at the time who told me nothing prepares you for the death of a parent.
No.
And it was such a monumental, just the heaviest imaginable emotional experience that I had ever been through.
But I think that that's huge because I know I've heard a lot of fifth steps and I've done my own, and I know a huge fear is, I mean, I can't imagine. It's like, oh my gosh, will I still stay sober when I live through the death of my parents, right? Like, am I going to go back out? And you're here to show people that you can stay sober through something like that.
Absolutely. Yes. So that was in March of 2019, and then we had a memorial here in Texas, and then in May of 2019 we had a memorial in Arizona where all of my dad's friends and old family friends were there. And then we actually hiked up Montana Peak, which is a mesa in Arizona, which I actually have a tattoo of.
Yeah.
Right here. And we actually spread my dad's ashes at the top of this peak where his brother, my uncle's ashes were spread.
Wow.
All of their friends from back in the 70s, their big hippie crew, all of their ashes were spread. And then when we got down from the mountain and got back home, I realized it was May 11th, my 2-year sobriety date. And I hadn't even thought of myself or my sobriety date or anything like that. I was totally immersed
in the present,
in this experience of memorializing my dad. And so that's kind of intense right there, you know. I think it's so funny that, you know, the question is, what was it like before my sobriety? And now we're talking about this, but that's how it can go.
I mean, I personally, I feel like before sobriety was a different life. That was a different person. And I'm way more passionate about talking about sobriety than before sobriety.
Okay, before sobriety, here's a great story.
Okay.
Similar. My uncle, my dad's brother, who had leukemia for 10 years, was, you know, towards the end, right? He was on hospice and, you know, he passed, right? And I was actually there helping caretake for him. You know, when he passed away, this was years before I got sober. When he passed away, I immediately went to his scotch collection. He would never let me have any of his scotch. It was these unopened bottles that were aged, right? 15, 20, 25-year-old scotch. And I completely blacked out. I was completely not even present for my family during this really hard time. I had just downed my uncle's really expensive scotch like it was water. I mean, I think I drank 3 bottles in one day, and I was just like, not even there. I was blacked out.
Wow.
Yeah, and like my uncle was a cool guy. I mean, he had like, you know, Tibetan Buddhist monks come and read the Tibetan Book of the Dead over his body. He had Aztec dancers come and do a ceremony at his house. I mean, he was a cool guy, very spiritual guy.
That is really cool.
But I just remember little pieces of that, and not knowing that some years later I would be on my own spiritual journey, right? And that my spiritual path is the 12 steps, and that I was able to be present for my family during the passing of my father in a way that I wasn't able to be when
like
other
a full
family
circle
members.
moment.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so when did you move to Dallas? Because I had met you like right when you had moved to Dallas, and I remember being like, yeah, Dallas gained another solid sober dude. And so you moved here what year?
2017.
2017.
Yeah, so we do go way back, Bren. Funny enough, I was living in Dallas when I was drinking, and then I got sober and went to sober living, and at about 90 days sober, in the summer of 2017, I came back to Dallas for about 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I was going to some really solid meetings in Dallas, some of which you were at, Mike was at, just that whole crew,
yeah.
right? During that 2 weeks, we packed up our U-Haul. Denise and I packed up our U-Haul, and we actually headed for Arizona, which is where my dad lived. And her and I lived with my dad for a couple months in Arizona before we got our own place in Tucson.
Oh, I love Tucson.
Love Tucson, Arizona. I mean, gorgeous. That was really the beginning of my sobriety outside of treatment and sober living. It was around Christmas of that year that we moved back.
Okay.
I asked the guy to be my sponsor. A guy we all know named Jeff G. Turns out Jeff was running a men's recovery program, and then he ended up hiring me to work at that recovery program. And so that was the beginning of me working in recovery, whatever you want to call it, field, or, and so that was kind of, whenever I was establishing a home group and all of that.
How long had you been sober before you kind of started working in the field of recovery?
From May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, when I was 8 months sober,
Wow,
7.5 months sober, I started.
And you've been working in recovery since 8 months sober to now.
Yep.
Right? So I know you've had like a lot of different experience working on different capacities when it comes to recovery. But like, what are you most excited about here at Maggie's and getting this men's program up and going?
What I was most excited about was one of our values, right? When I first came in and visited with the staff at Maggie's earlier this year was, one of the values is we can only lead the people in our program in the same direction that we ourselves are going, right? I remember being, 3 or 4 months sober and saying, hey, I want to go work in the recovery field. And my sponsor being like, great, it's a job. And you can't get paid financially and spiritually at the same time. It's like oil and water. They don't mix. Money and spirit don't mix. And it's very deceiving because when you're doing recovery, when you're working in the recovery field, it can be very deceiving because you still get a lot of feel-good, warm and fuzzy feelings. You see people having a spiritual experience, and it can fire you up, and that's great. But my sponsor said, I don't care if you're working in a treatment program or a recovery program or a nonprofit or if you're working as an auto mechanic. Whatever it is, that's your job. So what are you doing to get paid spiritually?
Yeah.
And so that's why I've, even since that first 7 or 8 months sober to now with 6.5 years sober, why I have never let up on how am I getting paid spiritually. I can come to work and I can lead meditation. I can come to work and I can do a big book group. I can come to work and I can, fellowship, right? And it feels like I'm doing recovery. But I also am doing my own meditation every morning at home. I also am going to my own home group in big book studies. I also am taking sponsees through the work. And, that's really kind of why I feel like I get to be here today, because I've seen a lot of guys not start to ease up on their way they're getting paid spiritually, thinking that they're hitting both things at work, and it's just not the case.
Oh, yeah. I've done it early in recovery when I started, about 1.5 years. I've done it. It's just like the book says, it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action. And I was headed for trouble. But I think that the really, really, really cool thing about the Magdalen House is just that sincere desire to be helpful in whatever capacity, right? And then now being able to do that for men, I mean, there's in Dallas alone, 1 in 7 men struggle with alcohol.
Pretty crazy to think. You know, when I saw that statistic, I wasn't surprised.
No.
You know, spent, you know, kind of to go back to that question, you know, I spent, you know, all the way up until this summer of 2023 from the winter of 2017 working as a job, for-profit treatment and sober living programs. Mm-hmm. You know, I didn't really think about there being any other option, you know, as far as what to do for work, mm-hmm. right? That was just the world I was in. Whenever I got to the last couple jobs that I had at different transitional livings, it was admissions, right? I was doing like the phone. Mm-hmm. I was answering the phones, and it was heartbreaking.
Yes.
Because, you know, 1 in 7 men being alcoholic in the city of Dallas, well, I would say that 9 out of 10 people calling in were not able to afford the program I was working for. Not only that, but they weren't able to afford the cheapest program in town when it came to the for-profit places. And so I was always trying to do everything I could to help those guys calling in get into a program that was no cost. And, you know, the options are kind of limited, right? Mm-hmm. The options are kind of limited, and I wasn't always so sure whether they were going to get the big book experience that saved my life, that I have been trying to transmit not only in my personal recovery and the meetings I go to and the guys I sponsor, but also transmit into the programs I've worked for. And I've always worked for programs that were very big book based. And so, I mean, it was an answer to prayer.
Yeah.
When Magdalen House called.
Right?
Because, I mean, I've been going to meetings in Dallas for a long time. I mean, you know, not that long in the grand scheme of things, but since I've been sober.
But a good chunk.
A good chunk. And there's not a meeting I've gone to that there's not a woman who's gone through Magdalen House.
Right.
I mean, it's like saved countless lives, what's offered here, you know what I mean? Which is really, you know, really what saved my life as well. And so just when they called me and said they wanted to start a men's program and that my name had come up a few times, I was just like, what? Like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, I need to think about this. Let's set up a call. Let me come and visit. And the fact that I had literally been asking God in meditation to show me how to help these men that are calling in, you know, it was a straight up answer to prayer.
I mean, similar experience over here. That's why I really feel like God lives in this place, right? Like, and God does for us what we can't do for ourselves.
Man. I couldn't have said it better myself.
You know, so cool. So for the men's program, what we have right now is our community, our meetings and fellowship, right? Next step is the free 3-month like aftercare. You don't have to go through any other programs in order to go to Next Step, right?
Yeah.
And then Next Step is our in-house first step.
Yes, that is the ultimate goal, right? But this Next Step program, this 3-month aftercare, kind of the non-residential program, I mean, it's so cool. Just seeing people being guided along that process with education and support, but not like this like accountability piece, that is between someone's sponsor and more importantly, their relationship with their higher power.
Yeah.
And just like the fact that that's offered at no cost, right? That like continued support. We don't care whether they've been through Magdalen House's first step or not, whether they've been to rehab ever or not. All they need is 72 hours sober and a sponsor. But then there's people with a year and a half or 3 or 5 years that can go, all the way up to, it doesn't matter where you're at, right? Just if you are needing some more education and support. I've been really fired up by this Next Step program.
Yeah.
But the ultimate goal of having that men's first step program, right? That 14-day intensive program. I mean, there's 56 meetings, all led by recovered alcoholics that are hand-picked and vetted and trained. And the fact that the program is almost entirely volunteer ran.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like...
It's crazy.
It's so amazing. Like, everywhere I've ever worked, all the staff were staff.
Right.
And then the clients were clients.
Yeah, no.
But for here, it's like, I I found out that a major part of my job is volunteer coordination.
Yeah.
Which is so amazing. Honestly, I'm blown away by the support from the community.
Yeah.
From the recovered men that I already know who are just jumping all in with, a lot of faith that this program is going to launch. And we're getting closer than ever. And there's just been an outpouring of support, right? Yeah. Volunteer coordination. It's like literally have been building an army, right? Last week I checked and we had 44 men volunteers that have already gone through orientation.
That just want to be involved.
That was last week. Now we have like 60. And by the end of the year, we're going to have 100.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just like 100 men that are ready to be of service. The volunteer opportunities are so cool. Those 56 meetings that somebody goes to in our program during those first 14 days, those are open meetings, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody in recovery can come to those meetings and they can return back to those meetings. They can go through the Next Step program and return back to those meetings and immediately be of service to the same program that helped save their lives. And it's not like I'm just saying this because it's a cool idea. I literally get to see it every day at the women's program. Like for 37 years, the women's program has been doing this.
Yeah.
And so we don't have to reinvent anything.
No, we're not reinventing the wheel. Yeah. We are literally doing the same program, just gender specific. And I witness it every day happen in this women's community. It is like, my life has changed personally and spiritually just by the pleasure of being here weekly. I feel so honored.
How did I get so lucky?
Yeah.
Is how I feel.
Yeah.
Because, there's an idea of recovery being transmitted with the entire absence of profit motive. Mm-hmm. That's a great principle that I learned early on. Yeah. And that's why I've been giving up a lot of my time for free and for fun.
Yes, free and for fun.
To help any alcoholic man who's struggling. I've always done that in my free time. But for there to be a program that's doing that is just a game changer. And I knew about Maggie's, but seeing it day in and day out and being immersed in it is like, I just cannot wait for that first man to walk in. Yeah. And what's cool is we have been having some community events, some community meetings. We started the Next Step program. So the men's program has already been soft launched. Mm-hmm. But everybody, when they think of Maggie's, they think of the 14-day quote unquote social detox. And when we have that for men, it's gonna be awesome.
Oh yeah. Just so flood.
Excited.
It's just gonna be raining men. Oh. So tell me, what is one of your, and I think I can guess, I could probably guess if I had to.
Okay.
What one of your favorite experiences that you get to have now that you're living in sobriety?
One of my favorite experiences that I get to have is I get to go and meet with, I think it's just so cool. I get to go meet with sponsees.
Yes.
And I get to hear about all the crap that they're going through. And I get to try to transmit some hope and some solution. Like, I've been through the exact same thing. But it's kind of funny. But I think the coolest thing I get to experience is leaving that treatment center or leaving that halfway house and getting in my car and driving to my house. Because it's like, man, I was that client. I was that resident. I was that person that was in the institution or the hospital or whatever you want to. And the fact that I get to, I pull up in my driveway and I see my dog in my window. Mm-hmm. And I see my house with this backyard with a fence, and I get to throw the ball with my dog and just kind of like chill and have my home life and have this experience with my partner who the craziest thing about my story is that when I first started my relationship with her, that was in 2014.
Yeah, you were not sober.
I was not sober.
She was there through it.
So she got 2.5 years of drunk and loaded Austin. There was 90 days where I was in treatment, I was in sober living, where we were apart for 90 days. And she had to set that boundary, right? And for me to, she would wait. This is kind of a cool or kind of an interesting story is that, the way my drinking was is that she would wake up in the middle of the night or before the sun came up and I wasn't there. I wasn't in bed. And she would come out into the living room, into the house, and look out into the driveway, and I was gone. Like, my drinking took me away. Mm-hmm. Even when I said, I'll be home in an hour, 5 hours have gone by. And when it was like, the man takes the drink, and then the drink takes the man, right? That whole concept. Yep. I was gone. And I would come back remorseful, with a firm resolution not to do it again. Yep. And then I would
promises.
Betray that over and over again. And now when she wakes up in the morning and I'm not in bed and it's before the sun came up, she knows that I'm in the front room meditating, trying to develop and continue to grow my conscious contact with my creator. Mm-hmm. Like, what? What? Like, who is this guy? And it's by no means perfect, right? There are certain trials and low spots ahead.
Of course, yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's just I'm a completely different person than I was for that first 2.5 years we were together. And the cool thing is, like, whenever I hit 2.5 years sober, I was like, okay, now I'm 2.5 years sober, even though I put you through hell for 2.5 years. So we should be even now, right? And it's like, no, not even close. And then when I was 5 years sober, I was like, okay, now I've been sober twice as long as the hell I put you through for 2.5 years before I got sober. And it's like, no, still not even. I mean, that is such a clear part of the amends process, of that 9-step process, where it says there's a long road of reconstruction ahead. Mm-hmm. We must sit down with the family, must ask every day, every morning in meditation for my Creator to show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And those are the principles. When it says practice these principles in all of our affairs. Yeah. I mean, going to a meeting every day, never saying no to a sponsee, getting commitments at the area level, going to workshops and conferences, and I mean, that's cool and all, especially for that first few years of sobriety. That was necessary, I think, in a way. But it got to the point where, what about page 19? Where it says an even more important demonstration of these principles lies before us in our homes, occupations, and affairs. Mm-hmm. And so I really had to kind of rebalance life to where, I'm going to do 3 things out of the house every week and then 4 nights in the house. But it's so crazy. I made that agreement a year or 2 ago. And it's so crazy how all of a sudden those 3 commitments start to become 4. And then all of a sudden it becomes 5. And it's like, wait a minute, what happened to the balance? Now I'm doing 6 things outside of that. Okay, so I need to bring it back into balance. And so I just, within the last week or so, kind of we came to the agreement that we were going to adopt a puppy.
Are you doing it?
We're doing it.
You're doing it?
Yep. This dog's 5 months old.
Yay!
And it's we have a 2-year-old dog, right, that we adopted when it was 6 months old. And so that dog needs a friend. That dog needs a sister. Yeah. And so we've been thinking about it for a long time. And all of a sudden, this dog with this really traumatic story, totally a rescue at this point, is going to come into our lives.
Which is so wild because y'all are about to gain your new best friend also because of Maggie's.
Yep.
Because Ashley, who works here, fosters all the doggies, and she's one of them. Oh, my gosh.
And so
miracles do happen here.
I can see that as a very grounding experience, right? I'm already going to get my sponsees kind of in the mode of, you come to me Saturday morning, Sunday morning, and there's going to be times when I'm meeting with that sponsee that I'm going to have to go and clean up.
Mm-hmm. Clean up the accidents in the house.
And go out back and train the dog to use the backyard. You know what I mean? And
yeah, but that doesn't stop you from working with others.
It doesn't stop.
Right?
Me. Yeah, exactly. But it's almost just going to be more of a grounding experience.
Yeah.
It made me realize that, a more important demonstration of my principles does lie before me in my home. Because it's like, how am I going to treat this puppy?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So to wrap it all up, first